So as you heard, it is Shabbat Hagadol, and I really can't tell you the reason why it's called that, because the truth is nobody really knows why it's called that. There's lots of guesses. Anytime the tradition has lots of guesses, it means we really don't know the reason. Some people say it's because of the special haftarah, which our students are going to chant tomorrow, that talks about the great day of judgment and the coming of the Messiah. Other people suggest it's because of the fact that traditionally this was the one time during the whole year when the rabbi gave a sermon, and it was on the laws of Passover, and it was an unusually lengthy oration to the point where people tended to get home pretty late from shul. I love a good tradition, don't you? No, don't worry. This will not be unusually long, but it will be about Pesach. Because just in a few days, Pesach will begin, and we'll be sitting down for Seder. And I think many of us are already feeling this is going to be a Seder full of dissonance. Much more dissonance than usual. Dissonances are going to be bountiful on this holiday. I'll name just a few that have been running through my mind, but maybe they're running through yours as well. Can we sanctify our freedom with 4 cups of wine while Israeli hostages continue to languish in Hamas captivity? When we remove 10 drops of wine from our cups, 1 for each plague upon the Egyptians, and say that our joy is diminished and lessened to see our enemies suffer, will we really mean it? Will parents invite children to move beyond the first 4 questions and ask questions 5, 6, and 7 that are on their minds, knowing that the Haggadah will not provide them any scripted answers? And will children be ready to listen to their parents' answers, open to their worldview, rather than readying themselves to debate? And can we avoid thinking of those who agree with us as wise, those who disagree with us as wicked, so that we don't all have to be unable to ask? I don't envy anyone who has to lead a Seder this year, certainly not anyone they've roped in to lead a congregational Seder. The in-joke there is, it's me. Hi, I'm the Seder leader, it's me. This is a year where it seems like every section of the Haggadah is bearing the weight of this moment and asking us to wrestle with just too much. This past weekend, another one was racing through my head over and over again on repeat. Next year in Jerusalem, as drones and ballistic and cruise missiles raced toward the Jewish state in an unprecedented open attack against Israel by Iran, my fear and my dread led me to wonder, what was it going to mean to sit there at the conclusion of the Seder and say, next year in Jerusalem? So Iran has stepped out of the shadows and revealed in plain sight for the whole world what we've known, that it's myopic to see this as a conflict between Israel and Hamas, because this is in fact a war between a league of fanatical religious extremists and tyrants and terrorists, and anyone who will stand up to face those forces. For weeks, Jews have felt alone and isolated. But for me, seeing that coalition of allies rally around Israel on that day bolstered me. Saturday, we saw that we have friends who are willing to act in unprecedented ways to respond to an unprecedented attack. And yet, Jews around the world still hold the tension of knowing that these hostilities are now out in the open. A barrier has been breached, and we don't really know what it's going to mean. It's still very much up in the air. So what will it mean to say next year in Jerusalem on Monday night? I don't know. Events are moving far too fast for me to venture a guess. But no matter what unfolds, I think the Jewish communities around the world will do well to remember that when we say next year in Jerusalem, We're saying a prayer, and a very specific one. Because next year in Jerusalem is really not about geography. If we were to go together to Israel, to Jerusalem for Pesach, we would not be fulfilling the fullness of this prayer and this hope at the end of the Haggadah. And to make that point abundantly clear, in Israel, modern Haggadot changed the line. Instead of saying, next year in Jerusalem, many say instead, does anyone know? Next year in a Jerusalem rebuilt. Because next year in Jerusalem is about cosmic Jewish time. It's a code. It's a code for messianic redemption. What we're really saying when we say those 4 English words or those 3 Hebrew words is, next year, may the Messiah have come, shepherded the Jews back to Israel, resurrected the dead, brought about peace for the entire world, rebuilt the ancient temple in Jerusalem so that we can celebrate Pesach the way our ancestors did. And that's a mouthful. So we shorten it up. Next year in Jerusalem, or next year in Jerusalem rebuilt. As progressive Jews, our prayers may be slightly different when we say next year in Jerusalem. We're not perhaps hoping for the temple to be rebuilt and the sacrifices reinstated, but we are still praying. We're praying for an age when we will live in a world that is tranquil and where people can dwell together. The name Jerusalem is itself an aspiration for this. Yerushalayim, Ir Shalom, a city of wholeness, of completion, of peace. And so this is yet another dissonance on Seder night. To say next year in a rebuilt Jerusalem as a prayer that there will be peace and safety and shelter for every soul, in a moment when that prayer feels so far from reality, will feel like an absurdity unless we learn from our history. Reformed Jews and the early Zionist movement shared a vital conviction. We don't passively wait for redemption. We don't leave miracles only to God. Rather, we take a cue from the Exodus. When our people got to the Sea of Reeds and saw the Egyptians closing in on them, they called out to Moses and said, "Why did you take us out only to be slaughtered here?" And then Moses called out to God to do something. And God replied, "Why do you cry out to me? Tell the Israelites to go forward." And if we listen, we can hear God calling to us now. What are you waiting for? Find a way forward. I'll walk with you. I'll even split seas for you. But you must go forward. To fulfill the prayer next year in a Jerusalem rebuilt, each of us is going to have to become a builder. So ask yourself, what do you commit to building? Will you be a builder of the alliances against extremism and fanaticism, both abroad and in our own communities? Will you build structures of support for our family in Israel who have been terrorized and traumatized? Will you build the opportunities that let us see beyond our borders and curb our inclinations to harden our hearts? Will you build your pride in our identity and your readiness to stand up against Jew hatred? Will you build our capacity to have the hard conversations we're going to need to have with one another and with our neighbors? If you look around you and you say, this is not an age of miracles, there are no wonders, there are no portents, I do not see God's mighty hand and outstretched arm, well, don't wait for the Messiah. Don't wait for God. Look at the past 100 years and you will see we Jews, we are miracle makers. So this year, may we build so that next year we can be in a Jerusalem rebuilt. Baruch Tihiyeh.